Today we begin the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah fits in actually historically in Ezra 7 and 8. That's where it begins. Nehemiah is a part of the story of Ezra. Ezra gets there first and kind of sets things up, kind of in a way. But Nehemiah gets there, and he also notices the shambles that the city is in. Remember, Ezra had set it up and did some rudimentary worship with the Levites and all the Jews that were there, but they hadn't had the walls set up. This was a big city, and they were unprotected, and they were unprotected from their enemies, and they had a lot of really bad enemies at that time also. We'll see even Ezra had to deal with that, with all these edicts going back and forth. And these edicts could also involve life and death. If the king decided to wipe out all those Jews, then these people could legally do it. That's how much power this king had over all of these provinces. So if there was any kind of problem or any kind of insurrection or potential insurrection, the king could stomp it down real easily. And so they always had that threat, and then they needed the walls for security. Although, again, we're going to see where the enemies will call it, you're fortifying against the king. They're saying is we're protecting ourselves from you. So we have Nehemiah coming in, and he gives his story. Nehemiah and Esther, these next two books we cover that are historical books, also are very much a narrative. They're a little different than the other books. The other books are a little more textbook oriented. This person did this person did that, this was the son of this person, this was the son of that person. This guy was a Levite, this guy was a this and a that. Here we get more of a narrative story. Yeah, you do have some genealogies in here. In fact, we'll notice later on, and in chapter 7, over half of chapter 7 is actually just Ezra chapter 2. Because there's no way the writers of Nehemiah would know that we would have Ezra to run with Nehemiah, And there's a lot of other history there. So they're putting the importance of the establishment of that generation. And so it's word for word from Ezra 2 is in Nehemiah 7. We'll see that when we get to it. But here Nehemiah is also in the 20th year as I was in Shushan, and he's talking of he'd been there for 20 years, but that doesn't mean that it had been, he was in the 20th year as I was in Shushan. So you get the idea that perhaps he was 20 years old, or that was the 20th year of his service. We're not sure exactly with some of these. It's hard to really establish a lot of dates. We will notice this in all of secular history, by the way. There's a lack of precision sometimes in dates. Now, when you see a precise date, it's there as an important thing and for a reason. And we do have some precise dates mentioned here and in different places, but sometimes I mentioned in the Bible and in different places. And this is true of all historical narratives. But sometimes also you'll get a vagueness in the 20th year. Well, is it your 20th year, or was it the 20th year of the rule of the king, or where is the 20th year of your servitude, and it kind of doesn't really matter. It places Nehemiah a little older or a little younger, but it doesn't change the facts. This is what we need to do as people who look at gleaning. The facts are more important than some of these other subjectivisms. Whether he was 20, 25, 30, or 40 when he did this is not nearly as germane as the fact of what is happening. So he talks about that. He talks about his brother is there and certain men of Judah. And I asked them how the Jews were doing that had gone down, that had left the captivity. And they talked about how the remnant was having a problem. And there was great affliction and reproach. And this made Nehemiah sad. Again, it was the news about how things were going. And it was not going well. There was a lot of affliction. Jerusalem had been broken down and the gates were burned with fire. They burned the gates with fire. You couldn't close the city. There was so much rubble everywhere. And because that's what desolation is. Desolation isn't just empty. We see this in kind of zombie movies and stuff where you go through a town and it's desolate and everything's upside down and roads are blocked and, there's just no way to function. You have to go back and set it right. And it came to pass that when these words kept down, he wept and mourned and fasted for days and prayed to God. And he prayed to God to help Jerusalem. And he hears these terrible things and he talks about this. And I want you to read the narrative. I don't want to go word for word through this because I want you to read it. I'm going to give you the overview. I can't tell the entire story because that's part of your joy. Part of your joy is going in. This isn't meant to supplant your own reading. So going over this, he prays to God. And he admits their sins as a nation, and he calls upon them, and he reminds God the words that you commanded Moses. And he goes on, and if you will turn me and keep my commandments and do them, you'd said that you would repent. And he goes praying to God that he would repent and move. And I beseech thee that you would turn your ear attentive to my prayer. So chapter 1 is about his prayer. Chapter 2 is in the month of Nisan, he goes to serve the king. And the king asked him, are you sick? And of course, these servants, again, were kind of invisible. It didn't matter if you were happy or sad. You came in and you gave the plate, or you gave the cup, or you cleaned up. You were hardly even noticed. So for the king to notice that he was sad, I mean, most people didn't have to hide their true feelings, because your feelings didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Only the king mattered. So, but the king seemed to have noticed Nehemiah. He liked Nehemiah, and he talked to him about it. And Nehemiah says a quick prayer, and then tells him the problems he's having. And the king says, what do you request? And so I prayed to God in heaven. So the king opened the door. Well, what do you want to do about it? As if he cared, which he did. And if it pleases the king and thy servant, and if the servant has been found favor in your sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah and unto the house of my sepulchres, that I may build it. And so the queen is there also. I don't know if that's Esther. I don't know if this is Artaxerxes and Esther. I know it's Artaxerxes, but it could have been Esther. It could have been after Purim. It could be that when we're looking at the stuff of Esther coming up, that happened. Many people do believe that it happened before Nehemiah, and that this is the same king, and this is Esther. It could be, he is very open to the plight of the Jews, especially about what he saw with Mordecai. So I'm going to draw that inference, that when we finish Nehemiah, which Nehemiah is the last historical book, when we do Esther, we're kind of doing a prequel. We're jumping back before Ezra. So, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say that's very possible that is Esther right there. But it says the queen was there. And so send me down with letters given to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over to Judah. And you would send these letters, and these letters gave him authority. These letters gave him resources. These letters even gave him, he took some soldiers with him to go. Now, Ezra wouldn't do this, but he goes, and he doesn't go by himself. He takes other people with him. And I shall enter into it, and the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. So the king granted his request to send him down with these resources to help Ezra and Zerubbabel and Yeshua with the establishment of Jerusalem. And I came to the governors beyond the river with these letters, but Sanballat and Tobiah, we're going to see them come up, and they heard of it and were exceedingly angry. Sanballat and Tobiah will be the villains of the story. They go back and constantly, and other men too, they're representative of a larger group of men and a larger group of people who were fighting against the establishment of Jerusalem. And of course the temple. And again, they would send the letters with their rhetoric about how bad it's going to be, and these guys are going to go against the king and all this stuff. That's Sanballat and Tobias. And he came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And he went around at night, him and a few other men in secret, and they looked around with torches to survey the city. So he walked where he could, he took an animal where he could, he looked it over, he was surveying the problems as he went. And I went by night by the gate of the valley, even unto the dragon well. And I went by the gate of the fountain, and I went up at night by the brook. And the rulers knew not where I went, for what I believed I haven't told them yet. He hadn't told anybody what his mission was, to bring resources. He wanted to see for himself what the problem was, and to make sure that he had gotten a correct assertion of the problem. He was responsible for these resources of the king. So were we really trying to rebuild? Was there really an effort going on here? Was I told correctly? Sometimes we Christians are guilty of throwing dollars without knowing if those dollars are actually going. So he goes to check around, and yes, this is in repair. Yes, this needs to be taken care of. He does his own assessment. And he went back to the rulers and talked with the nobles there. And I said unto them, you have seen the distress that we are in. Now Jerusalem lies waste, and it's been burned with fire. And I told him that the hand of God was good upon me, and upon the king's words that he had spoken unto me, arise and build. So we had the idea the king here is told to arise and build, which is good news. But Sanballat and Tobiah, the Ammonite, and Gershom, the Arabian, heard it, and they scorned. What is this thing that you've done, that you will rebel against the king? Now remember, the last time they had sent this letter, and the letter had told the king the wrong history. The history was true, but they worded it their way to make the Jews look bad. And of course, the edict came back that to stop the building. So this is a reference to that. And obviously, when the nobles are there, Sanballat and Tobias and all these other people are going to know about it. They have their people in there. They even try to get involved with, we want to help you rebuild. We want to get involved. And of course, Nehemiah and these guys say, no. We will rebuild our city. We don't want you to be a part of it at all. Remember, there was back in Genesis, there was a battle that Abraham went in, and the king of Sodom wanted to get some of the glory. And he goes, I won't even give you a shoestring of glory in this. This was from God through me. And they don't want to say that the pagans helped them build the city of God. We'll build it ourselves. Plus, these guys were wanting to get in so they could gum up the works and make it, difficult. And why do you rebel against the king? But he has these letters of authority that were, and he told them, the God of heaven will prosper us, wherefore we are servants to arise and build. And so they start building. And it's interesting, chapter 3 is a very interesting chapter. You can kind of go through it very quickly, but read through it. Don't shortcut it. All it does is says who was building what. And Elishabib, the high priest, rose up with the brethren, and they built the sheep gate and sanctified it, and set up the doors even unto the tower of Mirah, and they sanctified it and built the tower. I'm not going to go through all of these, because you're going to see about 20 of these, and next to him, so-and-so built, and next to him repaired this person, and next to him, the Tekotites repaired, but the nobles put not their necks to the work of the Lord, so that's kind of a shame on them. They had the more menial jobs done. They didn't want to go and work on it. But next to them repaired this guy, and after him repaired this guy, and after him repaired Jedediah, the son of Uriah, even over against his house. And next to him repaired Shallum, and next to him repaired Malchiah. You get all of these different repairings that go on. And so what they're doing is they're slowly building the wall. And everybody's building their own area of the wall. And you'll see in chapter 3 that you'll see this bearing, and they're going side by side. So-and-so is building, and so-and-so. And it's coming up like this. You're not building it like this, you would think, but they're all building it together. And so that the walls come up and they fit together properly. It is like just one wall, almost like a linking log, like a Legos that's building up slowly. And then this part will finish and this part will go up. So you have all of this going on. So that's all of chapter 3, but it's wonderful. But see, at the very end, we get back to the first guy. And between the goings of the corner unto the sheep gate, this guy repaired. So the last guy connected to the sheep gate. The sheep gate was the starting point. And next to him built this person. And next to him built this person. And next to him built this person. Read it and see it. And some of these people, like I said, they were lazy. They let other men do the work when they could have gotten glory and got out there themselves. So that's what's happening there. In chapter 5, though, we see the enemy attack. Sanballat is back at it, and they were building the wall. He mocked. He's laughing and mocking at this. And it's interesting. He spoke to the brother and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Look, will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubble? He even laughed and said that even if they built it, a fox could jump on it and break down this wall. The enemies are laughing them to scorn. The enemies are trying to discourage them. We'll find later on where these guys throw serious fear at, they're doing a psychological warfare on Nehemiah to get him to fear. We see that later on. But right now they're laughing and mocking the scorn, but the Jews don't listen, and they go back and continue to build the wall. And it came to pass that Sanballat and Tobias and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashterites, they saw that the breaches were stopped, and they were very upset. What happened was the wall was getting built so well that they couldn't walk through. They could no longer pass through. They needed the Jews' permission because now there were gates. And this made them angry. They were used to coming and going. They had been there before the Jews were, and they understood. And this was a desolate place. It's like that torn down house in the corner that nobody wants, but then when somebody starts to build it, everybody wants it now. So they didn't like it that there were no breaches in the wall for them to go through. That now they had to go through the gateway, and they had to go through and deal with the Jews properly. They didn't like that at all. And Judah said, nevertheless, we prayed unto our God and set a watch against them day and night. See, they had these walls set up, and they had people across the walls, and they had people at the doors. Now you can't come in on your own. You have to go through us. And they set up guards on their towers. They set up guards on the walls. They set up guards at the doors, that these people were not able and to come in. And the adversary started doing a little bit of psychological. They were saying to themselves, we can go in and they won't see us, and we can kill them in the middle of the night. And the Jews became very afraid. Those breaches where assassins could also come in. They could have had, remember we talked about the Amalekites. The Amalekites were like roving pirates who would pick off the weak. These enemies could send in assassins and just kill people randomly. It didn't matter. You were just trying to be a terrorist. You were wanting to terrorize the Jews. The important thing about the wall was also the security of the families of the workers and the families of the Levites. And, of course, security for themselves. And so with these breaches fixed, now the assassins couldn't come in, but they're trying to scare them now with words. And they talk about, and they shall not know. And it came to pass when the Jews dwelt, they came and said, all these places which have returned to us, therefore I am in the lower places behind the wall and the high places, and we will give swords and spears and bows. So that's a shortcutting version of that Nehemiah gave them the right to defend themselves. You'll have spears, bows, and swords. And he also set the families closer to where the workers were working. So while you're working, your family is close by, and other people can protect your family, and workers in one area could protect one another. Your families weren't separated by geography. You're working a mile away from them. You're working near them, so if there's a problem. Later on, we see that they will set up a trumpet system, that if anybody blows a trumpet, people will run to that area to protect. So again, a lot of security and defense is set up here in chapter 4. And it came to pass that the enemies heard about this, that God had wrought their counsel to naught, and they returned all of us to the wall, everyone. It came to pass that as time forth, half the servants wrought in work, and the other half stood with spears and swords and bows. And it even came to the point that some of them, they were working in shifts. Maybe the wall slowed down a little bit, but some would work while some would secure. And it got to where people would even work with one hand and have a sword in the other, or work with one hand and have a sword by their side. So everyone was taking care of security here. And so it even says that right here, that everyone with one of his hands wrought at work, and with one hand held a weapon. And the builders, everyone had a sword girded to his side. And I said to the nobles to keep the work going. It's great and large, and we are separated and far off. Therefore, if you hear the sound of the trumpet, our God shall fight for us. And we labored in the work, with half of them with spears, at the rising unto the stars appeared. Likewise the same, as I said to the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem. And in the night we shall be in guard and labor in the day. So neither I nor my brethren nor my servants nor the guards which followed, and none of them put off their clothing, saving every one of them for what they washed. These guys were serious about the protection. They were serious about protecting their families. And so they set this up, and this is very, very wise. This is big brain smart. That isn't just saying, God protect us. Now I know there are times, like with Ezra, to where we do say, God protect us, and if God doesn't protect us, well, he doesn't want this to happen. But he also calls us to be responsible, to be smart, and to be defensive. And don't think that Ezra didn't have people walking perimeters with swords. He just didn't have the king's people. He just didn't have the king's guard. I'm sure all these 42,000 people, they had enough to protect themselves against them. They were also smart enough to stay in large groups. So Nobody's being stupid here, and that's the point. And this is the setting up, just like we saw in history, the tearing down of Jerusalem slowly over the bad kings. Now we have the establishing of Jerusalem. And this is a good thing, and it's coming from a very big brain place. And Nehemiah and Ezra are both very, very wise men. This is a very good story to be continued. Thank you.